I am no economist, nor do I pretend to be one. As such, I will not talk about specific economic policy or doctrine which I would only be pretending to fully understand. Instead, I will be talking very shortly about the more abstract economic realities facing California and how the prospect of independence, while undoubtedly bringing risk, is a preferable alternative to remaining tied to the failing United States. One of the most persistent arguments against the independence is that California would be economically ruined doing so, with no prospect of maintaining its current wealth if separated from the United States. I'll admit that this has some truth, and that ideally it would be much better to remain in a larger economic bloc. Just as France is better off within the European Union, California on paper will be better off in a wider American Union. This presumption, however, is only true if the United States as a whole is functioning at least somewhat to the benefit of the states making up. This, quite frankly, is no longer true, and the United States has not only been acting unreasonably, but with outright hostility to states like California who have had the audacity to stand up to repeated abuses of power and violations of the law. We are very quickly becoming a target in this country, with our aid money perpetually withheld and the federal government simply waiting for a chance to knock us down. This arrangement is not how a stable economic union works. And all of this isn't even mentioning that, regardless of direct hostility from the federal government, we as a part of the United States are bound to their more general trade and financial policies. This too is proving utterly disastrous, as America has shown time and time again that it is not a force to be trusted. As things stand, the economy of the United States is essentially running on inertia, banking on the fact that they've been the world's greatest power for a century to rid themselves of any responsibility they'd otherwise have. It goes without saying, however, that an economic policy of we are too big to fail will only have bleak consequences. And while the US may be able to bring down large portions of the global economy with it, going up alone against the entire world could only last for so long. It'll quickly and inevitably leave us utterly isolated, as we eventually beg to be let back into the global order which we once dominated, but threw away out of a quest for absolute power. To remain part of the United States is to be consigned to this fate, and forever tied to all the resentment our country has fostered through it. We, quite simply, have no reason to do this. California is a land which is already far more economically independent than almost any other state in the Union, giving us a unique opportunity to succeed through independence. However, this situation is not quite as clear as many make it out to be, and as such I'll discuss some of the realities we face. Many talk about how we pay far more into the federal government with taxes than they give us in return. This is true, but it's only one part of the greater picture. Companies and people can come and go, and as such this tax argument is incomplete. The prospect of independence does fundamentally bring the risk of economic flight, the gradual erosion of our industry as a result of the instability independence would bring. This is a major concern, especially for the more volatile industries such as tech that could leave relatively quickly and have no truly fundamental reason to stay. However, this fear of instability is only relevant if staying in the United States would bring any less instability, something that is now increasingly doubtful. The fact of the matter is that every major industry in California is both not entirely dependent on the United States and fundamentally threatened by the American government's current actions. Like with every aspect of California, its international identity stands as a pillar for its economics as well. Every industry in California, from tech to media and agriculture, revolves around this characteristic. It's this characteristic, however, that is being attacked by the federal government more than anything else. We have witnessed how in the span of only a few months, the lives of immigrants has been constantly attacked with no care for the law or common decency. Millions of farm workers from the Imperial to the Central Valley now not only have to worry about the horrifically low wages, a problem that in and of itself must be addressed in independent California, but also about being grabbed off the streets and taken to a secret prison 1,000 miles away. How can California's agricultural industry, the backbone of our state since the years after the gold rush, continue when its workers are no longer safe in their own homes and obscene tariffs make it unprofitable to sell our products in the first place? Hollywood, a bastion of the state for over a century and the source of our international renown, is brought into fundamental peril when people are afraid of coming to this country. How can we expect global talent to flock to our state when our country is made it a place of fear rather than inspiration? And this isn't even to mention the cultural target placed on the back of Hollywood, blamed for corrupting the youth and degenerating our culture. As I record this, the president has just threatened to tariff foreign movies, a move which not only threatens the international flow of ideas, but risks a new trade war that would almost exclusively harm California. Hollywood barely survived McCarthyism when America was a global superpower, and it certainly won't survive a new round of paranoia and censorship in a country that is rapidly falling apart. And in that same vein, how are we supposed to continue the cycle of innovation that has brought advancement to our state when the foundation of the education system are under attack and the University of California, a globally renowned institution built through our own initiative, is now being audited by the federal government for ideological compliance? We, quite simply, cannot, and while it brings its own risks, independence will allow us to face these problems ourselves rather than being victimized by a government that cares more about ideological loyalty and enforced compliance rather than liberty and justice for all. I believe that these are all quite clear choices, ones which, even though potentially damaging, are greatly preferable to the alternatives. The one true difficulty we would have, however, would be the tech industry, who has a dual relationship of being the backbone of California's recent economy and the source of many of its greatest problems. This would have been an issue at any time, but has been made worse by the tech industry's recent decision to lend support and confidence to the federal government. This shouldn't be surprising, as the largest tech corporations have shown a repeated disregard for privacy, the rights of workers, and anything beside their own personal interest. Regardless, we'll have to contend with the fact they make up a large portion of the Californian economy, and are poised perhaps better than any other industry to leave it. Ultimately, we can provide what we have provided before, a reasonable environment to do business free of reckless policy decided by the president's whims. While this may retain the smaller corporations who are still tied to the infrastructure of Silicon Valley, we may still lose the largest corporations which have predictably shown that they'll spare no moral cost to achieve absolute power. There is a real chance of them simply deciding they prefer their arrangement with the federal government, and the possibility of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and more packing up and leaving California may be a prospect frightening enough to turn people off the idea entirely. But when you look at it within its wider context, the more absurd this situation becomes. It is true that we cannot and certainly should not match the amount of insider favors and sheer power the United States can give. But if keeping these companies means not only handing them the keys to our government, but sacrificing all of our other industry in the process, then that begs the question of what and who this really serves. Does it serve everyday people, the ones who have to work for these companies that no longer have guardrails because we handed them complete power on a silver platter? Does it serve those against big government, as corporations and the state fuse into one and have no checks but themselves? Does it serve even conservatives, as everything they seek to conserve is destroyed under the motto of go fast and break things, all of our established institutions and traditions included? If we are truly so dependent on large tech companies that we are willing to give them everything we could offer as a sacrifice, then are they truly doing business with us or holding us hostage? A good economy is ultimately only worth what it can bring to its people, and sacrificing the people's well-being for economic productivity is not a sustainable policy. And it is therefore necessary to recognize that just as important as the economic impacts of the independence in a vacuum is how it will be affected by our actions as well. Perhaps one of the greatest economic benefits of independence is what we ourselves can make out of it. Through the process of independence, we will be given the opportunity to push up against the various problems which have been propped up by the status quo which we will inevitably come into conflict with. Once again, I am no economist nor do I pretend to be one, and speaking too much in depth at this early stage is ultimately pointless. I will instead say that while we should tread with caution, we can apply many of the principles of our governmental reforms to our economic reforms as well, something which would happen regardless if the government and economy are ultimately two sides of the same coin. If we can figure out how to stop or at least weaken governmental tyranny, then we should also seek to prevent the excessive corporate tyranny which both enable and trigger that government action in the first place. Just as a Californian national identity is a fundamentally open one, we should also be open to the world economically as well. California should be a place open to all, a characteristic which already helps us greatly and, as I mentioned before, is brought under attack by the federal government. This openness, however, shouldn't just apply to the rich and corporations as currently functions in the order of today, but instead apply truly to all. Related to this, I believe it is absolutely necessary to greatly improve the conditions of urban and rural workers, especially in regards to farm workers. This should not be done exclusively through the government, and we should instead directly work to incorporate these groups into the independence movement in the first place. While higher wages could make our exports less competitive, once again, what is the point of these exports if millions of Californians are suffering as a result? Not to mention, in a world that is facing increasingly talked about demographic shortages, having California be an open door will help counteract the effects that will inevitably come to those who shoved away immigrants out of fear. Ultimately, we can benefit from a world of experience and skill by simply being open to it. Openness alone, however, is not enough to guarantee prosperity. We can open our country, then watch as the ruling politicians mismanage our economy, as opposition politicians blame that mismanagement on immigrants, while those in charge are all too happy to let the immigrants take the blame, creating the conditions once more for the environment which brought down the United States. Equally important, at the intersection of the government and economy, is the proper implementation of regional autonomy in a productive and internally beneficial way. If we can create a system for local regions to put forward their own targeted and specific investments, work with other regions on projects concerning them, and receive support from the national government as an extra stimulus, then we could create a self-reinforcing cycle which prevents the accumulation of power in a few hands, prevents resentment due to out-of-touch governance, more probably directs investments to directly help the people, and receives more support and confidence from the people as a result. Though many of these things are already technically possible on a county level, they are not truly encouraged, and cooperation between different counties hardly ever occurs without the state government's intervention. By removing the national government as a necessary medium for regional and inter-regional development, we allow for more efficient use of resources and investment into public works projects, which will force companies to equal these investments not only in profitability, but in what they can provide to the people. And by having a regional assembly be a co-equal, though more narrowly tailored counterpart to a national assembly, it will force politicians to meaningfully address the problems of the whole nation, more evenly spreading development and improving the quality of life nationwide. It'll allow for more specific localized projects which be conducted by the regions most enthusiastic, while simultaneously spreading the burden across in a more even manner than a single county. It'll even greatly aid national projects, creating both a framework for regional governments and the national government to cooperate, and creating a mechanism for issues to be sorted out in a more clear way than never-ending lawsuits. If we allow ourselves to dream, maybe it'll even lead to the completion of the high-speed rail, though I don't want to get too bold. In the end, we can make a vision of California that maintains both its soul and its prosperity. We can strive for a nation which serves its people, an economy that is geared to this end, and creates the infrastructure for peace and stability as a result. It may not be the infinite growth that the United States seeks above all else, but if done right, we can put California on the path towards slow and steady progress, which never loses sight of its basic purpose in the process. And while this may all be speculation, what is certain is that staying tied to the United States means staying tied to its fate. And in regards to the well-being of all of us, I believe deciding our own future will leave us in much more steady hands. For even if we make mistakes along the way, it will be ours and ours alone to make, and present us still with the opportunity to mold our future along the lines that we desire. This, more than anything else, is what signifies the economics of independence.